InspirED Virtual Learning Series. Welcome to InspirED. The InspirED Virtual Learning Series brings you information and resources on a variety of topics to help support learning and successful outcomes for students and families. Whether you're an educator supporting students with disabilities, an administrator providing resources to educators, or a family member, InspirED is for you. The content of this webinar has been pre-recorded, but we want to encourage your participation. If you have any questions or comments, we invite you to be part of the discussion by using the chat feature. Questions will be answered throughout the webinar, and later, we'll be providing a link in the chat to a brief survey. By completing the survey, you'll be able to access a certificate verifying your attendance in this webinar. Connecting and exchanging ideas is key to inspiring success. InspirED was created by the Ohio Department of Education's Office for Exceptional Children and OCALI. Welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Welcome to InspirED Virtual Learning Series, PBIS Lessons Learned, Part 2, Early Childhood Considerations. I'm Alicia Hart, Early Childhood Instructional Technology Specialist with the Center for the Young Child at OCALI. I'm joined today by Dr. Margie Spino, the Education Program Specialist with the Office of Early Learning and School Readiness, and Michelle Smith, Early Learning Consultant with State Support Team Region 8. Margie and Michelle, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Alicia. Just to let you know, so again, I'm Margie Spino, and my connection to PBIS is I really work at the state level to help the SST consultants develop training, coaching, and other resources to support the implementation of PBIS in early childhood settings.
And my name is Michelle Smith, and I work at the State Support Team in Region 8 as an early learning consultant. And my connection to PBIS is work at both the district and the state level in helping to prepare training, coaching materials, and resources to support PBIS implementation.
So today we're here to talk about early childhood PBIS, and I'm sure that many of you are already engaged in implementing PBIS within your districts, not only within specific buildings, but also district-wide, and that means from preschool through grade 12. I'm sure as you are doing that, you've realized that you also need to consider where you're implementing and who you're implementing with, and that implementation really needs to be different depending on the context. The good news is that the PBIS framework is really flexible. It's flexible enough to meet the needs of any setting. But we do need to be intentional and make sure that our data, our systems, and our practices for the PBIS network are really appropriate for the intended level. So today, we're going to be talking about implementing PBIS within early childhood settings and making sure that we're really meeting the needs of our youngest students from preschool to grade 3, early childhood. And we're going to be doing that through the lens of the Tiered Fidelity Inventory. So by the end of this session today, you'll be able to recognize the need for early childhood considerations when you're implementing PBIS. You'll be able to describe some early childhood considerations for at least 3 of the TFI features at Tier 1, and we'll have a little bit of time to reflect on some next steps for early childhood PBIS implementation. Let's start with the Tiered Fidelity Inventory, or the TFI. Again, I'm sure if you're implementing, you are already familiar with the TFI, and hopefully know that the purpose of this school-wide tool is really to provide a valid, reliable, and efficient measure of the extent to which school personnel are applying the core features of school-wide PBIS. But this inventory doesn't really explicitly address the needs of our youngest students. So we'll be going over 3 of the TFI features from the earliest stages of Tier 1 implementation, and then we'll be focusing on those additional considerations for early childhood. So to begin with, we'll start with feature 1.3, behavioral expectations. And according to the TFI, when a leadership team develops these expectations, they should be sure that they create 5 or fewer and make sure that they're worded positively, and to define what they'll look like in different settings and locations. So next, Michelle is going to help us think about what a leadership team should do and what they should also be considering when they're developing expectations at the early childhood level. Michelle?
Thanks, Margie. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of expectation posters that are posted in a school setting. If we think back to the criteria that the TFI sets forth for expectations, we see that the Little Spartans poster meets 2 of the 3 criteria. We see 5 or fewer expectations. I see 3 listed here: be kind, be safe, be responsible. They're all worded positively. We don't know whether they've been defined using a matrix or not in this example, but they're off to a really great start according to the TFI. What if we add that this is a preschool to grade 2 building? Would that change what we're looking at? Take into consideration that more than half of the students there are not yet reading and have not yet reached more than 4 feet tall. And the banner is posted above a bulletin board by the office. One of the top early childhood considerations for the use of the TFI is to reflect on the developmentally appropriate needs of all age levels represented in a building. Is this poster accessible to a 5-year-old that is just starting kindergarten? There are no visuals besides the cute little Spartan to represent be kind, be safe, and be responsible. And a 5-year-old passing by would probably not see this poster unless someone drew their attention up to it and read it to them. Now let's take a look at a second example. A couple of things have changed with this example, and we hope that you see those changes right away. Where do you see the poster hung? It's right down at that little girl's level. Do you see any visuals or pictures to represent the expectations or behaviors? You should see quite a few, one that is aligned to each of the behaviors within that poster. This is what we want to see with young children. For preschool, it is highly encouraged that there should be no more than 3 expectations. Even for our older learners, 3 is still a good number to keep in mind. In this example, you'll see an example of a matrix that supports be safe, be kind, and be responsible. This matrix is posted for adults. There are no visuals represented here and is not accessible for young children. If we look at the next slide, the expectations in this example come from a preschool program that is not housed within an elementary building. You should see on this example expectations that are paired with visuals across both the expectations and behaviors. These posters are posted down at eye level across all settings within the preschool building. The expectations that you see here come from a preschool program that is not housed within an elementary building. Again, you should see the heart, the hat, and the book to represent the expectations, as well as the consistent visuals to represent the behaviors underneath. Each of these visuals paired with the behaviors show up consistently across settings within that building. The preschool program and the elementary building that houses kindergartners has also developed a short social story with pictures of the different settings across both the elementary and preschool buildings for new students and families. This is a great tool for them to use at open house and orientation so that families and children get a good idea of what's expected across settings, and they have visuals to help them remember.
Thanks, Michelle. So that was a little bit about developing expectations, which at the early childhood level is really hard to separate from also teaching the expectations. But that's what we're going to dive into next, just to look at a little bit more closely. And for this feature, the TFI states that all expectations, both academic and social behavioral, need to be directly taught, they need to be taught to all students, and they need to be taught in all settings and all locations. Now, we know that instruction looks very different depending on what grade or developmental level that we're teaching. And we know that we don't teach things the same way to preschoolers or kindergartners, the same way that we would teach them to someone in the 10th grade. So Michelle is going to go over what exactly do we need to think about when we're teaching expectations to our youngest learners.
Young children learn new things best across multiple settings with multiple people using different materials. They thrive with many opportunities to practice and connect new learning embedded into activities and routines that are familiar to them. The first picture on this slide shows the words to a song that is sang every day by a class of preschoolers to the tune of The Farmer in the Dell. Let's take a couple seconds and just listen in.
1, 2, 3.
Behind me, safe for car. Behind me, safe for car. Elevator preschool. Behind me, safe for car.
Many early childhood programs also pair the song with hand signals to represent each of the expectations as children learn what they mean. The second picture on this slide demonstrates the importance of including many forms of representation for children to show what they know about the expectations. In the photo, you'll see a young girl who is nonverbal pointing to the expectation she was just acknowledged for during snack time. This is yet another advantage of pairing words and language with visuals, hand gestures, and song. It is so important to involve children in helping to teach the expectations. The photo on the left shows how one classroom gathered ideas from children on what it looks like to be doing the expectations. They also help to add photos from and around the classroom showing that expectation. I can't think of a more meaningful and engaging way to have children learn and gain ownership over those expectations. Transitions through the hallway can be challenging for young children. There is a lot to remember. In the second photo, photos of the behaviors expected in the hallway are posted by the door. The teacher runs through those expectations every day before leaving the classroom and involves children in teaching each other by giving examples. As they give those examples, the teacher then hands a small visual card with that behavior on it to the child. As they walk down the hall, they may stop periodically to ask each child with a card to acknowledge another or remind the class of the behavior they are holding. This is embedded teaching and learning at its best. Families are a child's first teacher. An important part of teaching in early childhood is connecting to home. In this example, the preschool kindergarten building shares their teaching schedule of expectations with families each week that includes visuals and ideas to support and teach the expectations at home. Margie, I think we're ready for the final feature.
Thanks, Michelle. So you can see from all those examples that Michelle has provided that teaching is different with our youngest children. And with young children, teaching is embedded in normal routines and activities. And even more importantly, there's a strong connection with families. So for this final feature today, then, we'll be covering 1.9 feedback and acknowledgement. And according to the TFI, again, if you're practicing or implementing PBIS with fidelity, you'll have in place a written set of procedures for how students will receive specific behavioral feedback. And that feedback needs to be linked to the school-wide expectations. It needs to be provided across all settings, including within classrooms. It needs to be provided by all staff, and it needs to be received by all students. So again, we know that providing feedback is a part of effective instruction. And Michelle just showed us how we'll teach expectations differently to younger children. So we also know that how we provide feedback and acknowledge behaviors for children in early childhood settings will really need to be different than what we say and do with older children. So Michelle, next she's going to explain about why it needs to be different and what it should look like with young children.
Young children require tangible items that they don't have to keep track of. The Early Learning Center on this slide uses fuzzy pom-poms to acknowledge children for demonstrating expectations. You'll see each expectation represents a different color. Safe represents yellow, pink is kind, and green represents be responsible. Children learn what each color represents, and then staff give palms according to the color being acknowledged for. After receiving a POM, children then put their POM into a clear class bucket so that they can visually see their contribution and how close their class is to a voted upon special time. Dance parties on the playground and bringing stuffed animals to school are two of their absolute favorites. When each class fills their buckets, it's taken to the office to fill a school-wide bucket. When this is filled, one of the kindergarten or preschool classrooms is nominated to sort the POMs by color, working on counting, quantity, and then reports back to the school on morning announcements the next day. A school-wide celebration is definitely near. Which expectation do children in the building show the most often? Kids are ready to find out. The power behind acknowledgement at any age level is the language of the expectation or behavior paired with the tangible item. If a child can't tell you what they received, a special sticker, a POM, or other acknowledgement for, the power is lost. A child needs to understand what they did in order to know what to do more of in the future. In this example, staff members carry a script on their lanyards so that they have it to stay consistent across all kids in the language they're using to acknowledge.
So we just covered 3 of the 15 total Tier 1 features of the TFI, and we showed why those features need to be considered differently for early childhood settings, and we provided some examples of how those features might look when implemented in those early childhood settings. We'd like to leave you today with just some thoughts for your future. We'd really invite you to take some time to reflect on your current PBIS practices and consider what future improvements you could make. Here are just a few questions to consider. Are your current PBIS practices developmentally appropriate for young children? More specifically, for your expectations, are there visuals and not just words? When you teach expectations, are they embedded across routines and activities on a daily basis? And do children experience the expectations in multiple ways? And are they able to represent what they know in multiple ways? And finally, we ask that you think about, for your acknowledgement and feedback system, if you are using tangible reinforcers, are you pairing that with positive descriptive verbal feedback? Overall, we really invite you to reflect on your entire PBIS framework and consider if all of your data, your systems, and your practices are developmentally appropriate. And by that we mean, are they appropriate to the age and developmental level of the student, whether it be at the early childhood level or the high school level or anywhere in between, but most importantly at the early childhood level. So for more resources, or if you're interested in finding out more about PBIS, we have a link to PBIS apps where you can find out more information about the school-wide PBIS Tiered Fidelity Inventory. The next link, it will take you to the Ohio Department of Education page where you can find out more information about early childhood PBIS as well as PBIS in general. And on that page as well, it will link you to Ohio's 16 state support teams. And those would be a great place to connect with if you want more specific information about early childhood PBIS. Alicia?
Thank you, Margie and Michelle, for taking the time to join us today. It's been so helpful to discuss some early childhood considerations for implementing PBIS. I know people may have some questions though, so I want to share your contact information with everyone watching. Margie can be contacted at margie.spino@education.ohio.gov, and Michelle can be reached at michelles@sst8.org. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion. Stay on with us because we'll now have a live Q&A with Margie and Michelle.
And we're back. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're live with Margie Spino and Michelle Smith to answer any questions you might have. And if you have those, go ahead and enter those into the chat. Margie and Michelle, it looks like our first question is, what other TFI items are different for early childhood?
That's an excellent question. Thank you for asking, and one we get very often. When we think about the staff that support young children in preschool classrooms, There are some unique roles that should be represented within that leadership team. So paraprofessionals are really important members of the leadership team, as well as family members that play that critical role in the lives of young children. I would say the other area when you're thinking specific to young children is in the area of responding to challenging behavior. We know young children are learning how to be, they're learning social skills at that age. And so processes for responding to challenging behavior should look very different and should look more like teaching when you're thinking about young children.
Those are excellent points. Thank you, Michelle. Margie, do you want to add anything to that, or do you want to move on to the next question?
So sorry, just to add to that, and I think you've heard it all throughout the presentation, and it's something that that we continue to say is that you just think about how, what are the things you need to do to be developmentally appropriate with the age group that you're working with. And it's really hard sometimes to separate out the how we teach and what the system is within a preschool or an early childhood setting. And so so Michelle talked about, and what we tried to cover today were some of the ones that were very more distinctive differences, maybe need to be more explicit differences, but we would invite people to think about too, for each and every one of the TFI features and whatever you're doing when you're implementing your systems, your practices, your data, everything really should be looked at and considered through the lens of what's developmentally appropriate, what works for your staff, what works for your children within those settings.
Excellent, thank you. It looks like the next question we have is, how do I know what the early childhood considerations are for each TFI feature?
So we would say to get in touch with your regional early childhood consultant. They have a ton of information on what that looks like across all items of the TFI. If we had another hour or so, Margie and I could go through each of those one by one, but we really encourage you to reach out to your early childhood consultant within your region to get those specifics.
And again, just to add on, I think even checking in with the staff within your preschool or your early childhood programs, they know what's developmentally appropriate. They will know what's going to work with children and what sorts of things need to be maybe revised, adapted, slightly changed from what you will find in more school age resources.
Thank you. It looks like a question we have in the chat is also, we can consider developmentally appropriate practice with existing tools. Are there early childhood specific tools, such as an early childhood TFI or an early childhood SAS, or et cetera?
There are early childhood specific tools. And this is something that the early childhood consultant in your region can get for you. There is a companion document that goes along with the TFI and with the self-assessment survey that will provide some of those considerations for preschool children, but for all young children.
Excellent. And it looks like our last question here is, what about tier 2 and 3? Are there early childhood considerations for these tiers?
There are, for sure, considerations for those tiers. They're not yet in writing, they're in development, but be on the lookout for those consideration documents also.
And I think that's all the questions that we have today. Thank you for joining us. We'd love to hear your thoughts about today's episode. So I am going to drop a link to a survey in the chat. If you could fill that out and let us know your thoughts, that would be great. That is now in the chat. Everybody should see that. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any other questions that you might have. Margie and Michelle, thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge, your experience, your expertise, and I just want to thank you for being with us today. There are really some wonderful things happening in early childhood and in PBIS across the state, so thank you.
Well, we certainly appreciate the opportunity to share early childhood PBIS. So thank you, Alicia.
Yes. Thank you, Alicia. And thank you to everyone that took the time to be here.
Have a great day.
Thanks for participating in today's webinar. We provided a link in the chat to a brief survey, and we'll also follow up by email with the same link and additional information about this series. This series is for you, and we welcome any feedback. By completing the survey, you'll be able to access a certificate verifying your attendance in this webinar. This recording and related resources will be available on demand through our website, ocali.org. There, you'll also find upcoming and past episodes of InspirED. And you can keep the conversation going on social media. Find us at OCALI Official on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and by using the hashtag InspirEdOhio. As we move forward together in virtual learning, our connections help to inspire success. InspirED Virtual Learning Series.